Belle, his beautiful and angry aunt, calls him to go to the backyard. Belle is confused, as it really is too soon. Zeus and Zard are already waiting outside the house, both dragging their feet in sleep. The sun hadn't even risen yet. Belle, knowing her small family, quickly imagined that this was her grandfather's possible execution and that she had called him to say goodbye to him. But he approached the place where they were and noticed some different materials. His aunt threw some training equipment at the boy's chest, causing him to fall to the ground. He felt tense about it all and wondered if the execution was actually his. The boy looked at Zard and saw that, beneath a sleepy and tired expression, he was proud and looking at his nephew, who was always so sweet and affectionate towards him. His expression was different, looking worried, which made the boy even more nervous. Alfia caught Belle's attention. "You told me you would be a hero, the last hero. And today I want to see how far you can go to fulfill your promise." Belle was surprised and asked if his beloved was smiling with joy. Alfia showed the boy a frightening look, almost making him cry. He wiped his eyes, and with a completely different expression, one the adults present had never seen on the boy, Belle looked determined. Even for a child, it seemed like he knew the weight of the promise he made, and every day from that day on, the boy trained tirelessly. In the mornings, he trained with his aunt, in the afternoons he trained with Zard, and at night, his grandfather would spend hours telling stories of heroes of the past, Albert, Argonaut, Epimetheus, and several others. He filled the boy's heart with the desire to be like them, to save all people and to become stronger. He always told Belle about the girls from Orario. This routine was repeated for several days. One night, after almost a month of training, Belle was already lying on the bed completely exhausted. At a night meeting, everyone else talked about how talentless the boy was, but even so, he didn't give up and every day he tried harder than everyone else. This was truly astonishing. He didn't want to give up on his promise, and they were thoughtful about Belle's progress. Alfia commented that he had an idea. Zeus began to get worried about what was to come, and she said that in the morning she would throw the boy into the cave in the mountains so he could train alone. Zeus jumped up from his chair and asked if she was going crazy. Without believing what he said, she got up, pulled the poor deity by the beard and he, in a cold sweat, began to tremble and apologize to her. "I just don't think it's a good idea to do this to him right now. He's too young and inexperienced. He will die the moment the first horde of monsters appears." Zard, who had been silent until that moment, said that it seemed like a good idea and that it should be done. "He's been training for almost a month now. We need to put him through a bigger ordeal." The poor god was unhappy with this absurd idea. "At least let me put the fauna on him," the protective god desperately asked for permission, but Alfia denied this request. "Let's not be hasty with this. Let's make his body and his abilities evolve without the need for a fauna. Many in our time they did this and had great growth after acquiring the language. Apart from that, don't forget that he thinks you are a grandfather by blood. The less he knows about who we are, the safer it will be for him." Zeus asked how she could talk about safety and want to send the boy to the cave in the mountain. Alfia and Zard didn't say anything else, but due to the atmosphere of the place, the protective grandfather lost the argument. The next day, Belle got up early as usual and went straight away to warm up, waiting for training with his master. Alfia called the boy. "We're going for a short walk." During the journey, a long silence took over them both. To break this silence, Belle spoke to his master. "I feel lighter. Somehow, I feel like my strength has increased." Alfia just asks him not to think he's too much. "Today you're going to prove to me whether you're really stronger. I want you to go into the cave and bring me the item dropped from some creature." Belle was in shock and could no longer walk. Her words made him remember the time he was almost killed by a goblin and that his grandfather strangely saved him without much trouble. Alfia slowed her steps, but didn't stop completely, and the beautiful white-haired woman just stared out of the corner of her eye. Belle was shaking, but he clenched his hand into a fist, took a deep breath and ran to catch up with his aunt. The white-haired woman just gave him a slight smile. They arrived at the entrance to the cave and Bell began to get tense again because of all the darkness in the place. He remembered hearing from the villagers that various monsters lived there, from goblins to demonized wolves that can use magic. He got really tense, but didn't back down. Alfia gave him a gift, a sword. Bell was struck by how beautiful she was and asked if she had been too expensive. His aunt asked him not to worry about it and just go. Bell looked at her in awe and thanked her humbly, which made the former adventurer blush. The boy started walking towards the cave and, looking at the sword he received, he noticed that it had a very peculiar size. It was much smaller than an ordinary sword, and he quickly guessed that it had been made because of the narrow places in the cave. Having a big sword in a small place would really be a problem during a fight. Bell gripped the hilt of the small sword and began to walk, but always with great caution. He had been walking for about 5 minutes and hadn't seen anything much. He began to remember his family's advice to not just focus on what he is seeing, but also to feel and hear absolutely everything around him. He took all the advice he received and made it his life manual. Everything was completely recorded in his mind, every word, every scream. The more he thought about it, the more his body began to calm down and his breathing became calm, his heartbeat slowed. The boy began to notice more the sounds inside the cave, drops of water falling on the ground, chips of stone moving for some reason. He noticed small moving footsteps. When the boy heard the last, he got into a defensive position and soon realized that he was not alone. Since entering the cave, his heartbeat wanted to speed up again, but the boy tried to be cooler this time. He knew that the monsters outside the dungeon are not that dangerous, mainly being a threat only when they are in a group and, preferably, in an open place. Bell was in a small room with a few columns scattered throughout it. The boy had the advantage. He was focused and looking for his opponents for his first adventure, when he suddenly noticed something and dodged out of pure reflex, but not enough to avoid cutting his cheek. The boy's body began to lose control and the fear of death knocked on the door, but he began to remember the training he had with Zard, where the man made the boy go through something similar. He had to dodge several objects that were thrown at him in training, but this time he could actually die. Bell used all his ingenuity to dodge the arrows that were fired at him. The boy used the columns to his advantage and tried to get closer to the places where the arrows were launched. He managed to hit his first monster, a small goblin who was impressed by the little boy's speed. Since the beginning of training, he always noticed that he had good speed, but it wasn't just him who noticed it, his coaches did too, and they invested a lot in Bell's speed. He started to get excited and ran at full speed, drawing his small sword against the monsters, but one of the monsters ended up surprising him. He was bigger than the others and was holding a large branch of an old tree. He hit the boy squarely, who hit his back against a column in the cave. At that moment, all that confidence he had until now simply disappeared. Bell remembered that he was just a newbie and that he couldn't think of himself that much. He hurriedly got up and once again started to run, but the monsters didn't want to miss this opportunity and started shooting more arrows at the boy. Bell completely lost control of the situation. He was hasty and didn't analyze everything. Looking towards the exit, he wondered if his aunt would come in to help him, but he imagined her look of disappointment and once again clenched his fist and clenched his teeth. He entered the columns and, with much more caution, headed towards the monsters. In the process, the boy was certainly hit by the arrows, but thanks to his speed, nothing was that serious. Unfortunately, his body was full of small cuts, his clothes were torn, but his light armor came in handy. Bell knew that to win, he needed to defeat the biggest goblin first, and he would be the biggest problem. However, the boy didn't know how he would defeat it, especially since the monster was theoretically armed.